Okay, so now you guys are visible now.
Perfect. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We have some people on site today, and we've got some people on the live stream. So we'll just give them a couple more minutes or a couple more seconds to get on, and inshallah we'll start. All right. So assalamu alaikum. Welcome to episode 5 of the Unpack series. We're so lucky to have you all with us. We want to also give a really warm welcome to the people and our audiences online. We hope to have a good participation from our online audiences as well. So, the Unpack series is a series that seeks to explore difficult conversations and topics concerning Muslims, and we hope to facilitate raw discussions and foster nuance and compassion on some topics that don't often get the spotlight. Some topics that we've spoken about before include halal dating, pornography, spiritual abuse, and gender roles in Islam. Our topic for today that we'll be exploring is about losing your Iman, and it's a very broad topic, so inshallah we'll spend the rest of the night talking about that. A brief introduction to myself. I will be your facilitator for tonight. My name is Ahmad Hamid. I am a ISRA volunteer. I've been since 2020 when I started with the Muslim Leadership Program here, and I've been a project manager on some of the events that they do, especially the Iftar with the ABC journalist that runs in Ramadan. I am also a midwife by trade. Don't ask how all those things intersect, but they do, alhamdulillah, and I find this topic to be a very important one to discuss. I also will give a brief introduction to our amazing speakers that we have with us today. But before I do that, I just wanted to give a disclaimer that the opinions represented by the speakers today do not reflect those of Israel, and this is a judgment-free and safe zone today. So with us today, we have the lovely Makiz Ansari, who has a background in economics and social sciences, and she's found her passion in theology and community services since 2003 and has been active in interfaith and intercultural dialogue since. From 2012, she's been a teacher at the Amity College, and she teaches studies of religion and values for almost a decade now. Makiz is also an ISRA instructor and runs courses in Islam for the community in general. She is currently in the process of completing her Masters of Islamic Studies degree with the Charles Sturt University. So welcome, Makiz. We also have Sheikh Wissam Shokawi, who commenced his studies in Damascus, Syria, where he studied specific books from the Fatih Institute in Damascus with traditional scholars in a one-on-one format. Following this, Sheikh Wissam joined the University of Isla in Lebanon and undertook a master's degree in Islamic sacred law. In 2018, Sheikh Wissam began a PhD in social psychology in identity at the Western Sydney University of Australia. In his free time, I'm sure the very limited free time that he has, Sheikh Wissam enjoys spending quality time with his family, enjoys drinking coffee and decaffeinated tea. So we're very lucky to have you, Sheikh Wissam. Our final panelist, but certainly not the least, is Aspasia Azakus. She's been a revert for 11 years. She holds a Bachelor of Secondary Education in Arts and is undertaking a Master of Classical Arabic, mashallah. She has been volunteering for 8 years with ISRA and currently volunteers helping new Muslims and the ISRA's studies of religion with school talks in Islam in Muslim and non-Muslim schools. So please give a warm welcome to our panelists today. I guess to start off our conversation today, I just wanted to get a really broad question to start us off, and it's about what you guys believe in all your expertise and spaces that you're in are some of the common reasons people struggle with their faith in today's context. So I think we would want to hear from you, Sheikh Wissam, first.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having me here today. An honour and an excellent, obviously, platform to be able to canvass these issues. Look, some of the things that I see that are really problematic in today's day and age, identity is huge. And, going back about 15 years ago, you probably would have had to only have dealt with a real identity in that's sort of within, the manifest identity in real life. Today, it's the virtual identity online, that people have to canvass, but also real identity in life amongst people. These are really two big, massive issues that people are struggling with today. Who am I in this world? Where do I fit? Where do I belong to? So on and so forth. But also a lot of the challenges that we see, a lot of things that are coming up around us, how to navigate these broad issues. You know, you mentioned before, you know, that you discussed things like pornography, you discussed things like
spiritual abuse,
spiritual
gender
abuse,
roles.
and so on and so forth. But you know, these are massive challenges, and we also have advocacy today for things that seeking to undermine the Islamic tradition, and advocacy for all sorts of things in every facet, whether it's things that pertain to the family, pertain to the self, pertain to God. God is being eliminated from the equation. You don't need God. You know, it's a concept like, you know, whatever the situation of, you know, of our feelings today, this dictates. But our tradition is very clear and very manifest that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded these rules, and we adhere to them. And people, they struggle, well, how do I navigate, you know, adherence on the one hand, but all these things I have to think about and consider on the other. So these are just some of the points.
Yeah, very good ones. I think that we'll touch on throughout the discussion, inshallah. Sia, what do you think are some common issues?
I think obviously the struggle with faith is a multifaceted concept. I think I'm going to speak particularly from the revert community, it comes from a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge of the faith. I think when reverts don't know how to understand the faith or how to apply the faith or why they're doing what they're doing, I think that really sets the foreground for trouble and trouble in faith. I also think a lack of community really can help compound these issues of why someone struggles with their faith. Our deen is one of community, and it's a communal religion. A lot of our acts of worship are based around the community. And I think when that community is missing, a severe consequence of that is going to be naturally that someone is struggling with their faith. As well, particularly through my experience, I've found that community can also help clarify these issues. If people are around you who understand or have that knowledge that you don't have, I think that can be quite a good remedy to struggling with faith.
Yeah, good points. Makis, what do you think?
Inshallah, what Sheikh Wissam said and what Sia said, I think in addition to that, as I was thinking about your question, the common reasons why people in today's context lose faith or struggling, I thought to myself, like, there's two aspects to that question. The struggling with faith part, and then also the today's context part. And I think Sheikh Wissam and Sia touched on both. But from the angle that I was looking at the struggling with faith part, I thought it's actually, it may sound rather radical, but it's actually a good thing. Because it is not a conclusion that one person is when you hear somebody is struggling with faith, there's a tension. And that tension, I think, is quite healthy for me in some ways, because I think if a person is struggling, they're at a level they're actually cognitively, consciously thinking that what are these issues that I'm asking? Like maybe it's intellectual questions that in today's context, going back to the identity crisis and all of that, there's all these questions that are posed at us when, like Sheikh Wissam said, when God is taken out of the equation, how do you really know God exists? How do you know Quran is the word of God? How do you know your truth is the truth in this time of relative realities? And so putting that in consideration, I think if a person is struggling with that, I think it's like almost for a lack of a better term, I think it's an authentication process that that person is actually trying to shift away from an inherited faith, a faith that perhaps was like a culturally constructed faith, a faith that was emotionally or sentimentally they were aligned with, to that of perhaps I would say categorically, and I would perhaps consider my own experience a bit similar to that, a faith in blind or cultural faith to that of investigative faith. So we're looking at Iman tahqiqi, like, and that junction, I think, is for anyone who's thinking that they're actually struggling. That struggle is perhaps a divine grace to make us to think that there is much more for us to explore, and just ahlan wa sahlan, here you come, a welcome, because inshallah Islam does not shy away from its answers.
Yeah.
So inshallah parking those questions and exploring that, I think is a good news to a person who's at that junction.
Yeah, we've had a lot of questions about that and about understanding the current context that we live in and how that has very unique challenges. We've kind of divided the questions from tonight into three separate themes. So the first is about this internal conflict that you have with losing faith and how that's influenced by your internal space. And then there's the external stuff, so what we've been talking about now. And I hope to end the night as well with a toolkit with some advice and tips about how to move forward when having these challenges. I think what you said, Makis, is a really good place to start about this healthy tension, because it's really about reframing it, right? So I guess one of the questions that's really important here is like how, with this negotiation that you're doing, do you maintain your Iman? And how do you reconcile your Iman with the common problems that we're facing? Maybe we can start with you, Makis. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I think Sia touched on it when she said that human beings are multifaceted. I really was gripped by that concept, because we actually are, because we have the aql, the intellect, we have the ruh, the spirit, we have the nafs/ego/ the carnal self, and we also have the different constituents and the qalb, the heart. So depending on our experiences on what is at that time that we're actually trying to come to gripping onto to faith, what is really the dominant thing that is really dominating or governing us? Is it and that, I think, also sort of breaks down into an intellectual quest or an emotional or experiential quest. So sometimes if we have, and I think to come to a level of certitude, to be certain, or tasdiqi iman, to have affirmed faith, we need to take that leap of journey of really seeking that knowledge, the whys. Usually religion comes quite restrictive at the face value to people. So when you think of religion, people is like, oh, that's very restrictive and so forth. Now, where is my agency? Where is my freedom? I want to be free. Going back to that identity, who am I really in this life? So I think exploring those things is a healthy way going forward in keeping up with your faith. But also if it's unfortunately, or sometimes nothing is really bad from an Islamic point of view. It's either good in itself or by the consequences that it produces. And so if sometimes we come up with contact with, unfortunately, harsher experiences or interactions with people representing faith, that may actually blemish our experience and the way we filter faith. And so to navigate through exactly what it is, it's a bit of a self-awareness journey at the same time. What is it that really is my question? Is it really those intellectual questions that I'm baffled by and I'm going to go and find out answers to? Or is this something that has been actually hurtful to me and emotionally or experientially, or my particular cultural elements? That is, how can I go through navigating and filtering out Islam from all of that, including my own emotions? So I guess that would be the journey, depending on the individual and which facet of that individual is really driving them forward in that tension, as you put it, the healthy one.
Yeah. Sheikh Wissam, does the Islamic scholarship support this idea of kind of fighting your way into figuring out what is, Islam, and what is why we should maintain Iman?
Absolutely. There's a concept that I've been teaching for a very long time. Agitation is good.
Yeah.
Agitation is very healthy. If you're agitated, it's a sign of faith. If you weren't agitated, that's problematic. Someone came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, Ya Rasulullah, I get these thoughts that if I tell you what they were, I would rather be reduced to charcoal than tell you what they are. And the Prophet ﷺ, and there's two narrations on this, and the Prophet ﷺ said to the companions, and to this one particular companion, really do you get those thoughts? And he said, yes, I do, Ya Rasulullah. And the Prophet ﷺ said, that is Iman, that is faith. And the scholars, the way that they looked at this particular hadith, that the fact that he was agitated by those thoughts means that he has a type of jealousy over his faith, a protective, if you like, mechanism that I want to protect, and I hold valuable what I have. So I'm agitated because what I have is valuable and I want to protect it. So agitation is very good. Intrusive thoughts, no one can sidestep.
Yeah.
So intrusive thoughts are going to come. Does God exist? Why does evil exist? He created the world. He has the knowledge. He knew he was going to go to hell and hellfire. Then why let it all go? Why let it occur? They're all answers to these questions. We can canvas some of them tonight if we have time. Though agitation is very, very good. The problem, though, is when the agitation and the discomfort becomes more than that. So it starts to become attitudinal. It starts to become behavioral.
So are you saying there's a difference between a fluctuation in Iman and a losing of Iman?
Fluctuation in Iman is natural because one day, yawmun laka wa yawmun alayk. One day is yours, next day is against you. You feel like you're on top of the world one day, next day you feel that you're in the trenches, like you don't know what happened to you. What happened to that quality of what I was feeling the day before? And this is by divine design. Because if the status quo was always the same, you'd never be pushed or propelled forward to develop, right? And so to basically refine what you have. So that fluctuation in faith is always going to happen. This is by design. No one can avert that, right? This Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He controls the heart in that facet. I'm either losing my faith, I'm losing my faith. Once you start to formulate an outlook, so an outlook is like, for example, this: I believe that there is something, but why do we call that God? Now that's a shift, a major shift. Why is it a major shift? Because first of all, you were arguing for God, and now you're saying, well, I believe in something, but how can it be God? Now what shifted that? What made that shift? And primarily, a lot of the arguments that I engage in nowadays with a lot of the kids is, well, if God is all good and merciful, then why do these things exist? But I can't evade the infinite regress argument. There's got to be something, but why do we need to call it God? So once there's a shift, whether it's in belief, attitudinal, outlook, behavioral, things start to, and then it becomes really problematic, whereby you're on the slippery slope. I had one person who said to me, look, I'm a hafiz of Quran, I've been reading for 30 years, 40 years, leading, had the imama, leading, so on and so on and so forth. Now, I can't drag myself to salat. I can't take myself there.
Yeah.
This is really problematic. And this is not any longer intrusive thoughts. This is not any longer agitation. This is more than that. This is progressed. So this is on the verge of Allah A'lam, but it's taken another step forward. So
I think coming from a clinical background, we talk a lot about like recognizing symptoms to a disease, right? So is there a way to recognize in yourself when you've lost your Iman, or do you feel like God gives people a way to recognize that in themselves, like symptoms to a disease?
Look, from a Shari'i perspective, from that lens, and this is the notion of, what takes you out, what brings you in. And there's a big argument about this. But effectively, the scholars say that what brought you in is what can take you out. You reject any one of the things that brought you in, that can take you out. So, it's fundamentally, it's about rejecting or not believing, or, having some, if you like, deficiency in a belief that stops short, therefore, of you being in faith, which, that's from a very technical perspective, very technical. And sometimes you get people that don't know inside themselves what's going on until they come to a scholar and they say, look, I need to put all of it out there. But I have to just mention one thing in this facet. And it's a concept that I've really argued for fervently, and that is, imagination of kufr is not kufr.
Yeah.
So to imagine yourself as a disbeliever is not disbelief. It's like having a dream and you think it's real, only to wake up and it's not real.
Yeah.
So
God doesn't judge your thoughts.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. But sometimes you think I have a thought, that thought has exited me from Islam. That's not the case.
Yeah.
Absolutely not the case. You may think it's a belief, you may think it's an ingrained belief, but it's actually not.
Yeah.
And so, unless you canvass that issue with a scholar, somebody who's learned it, somebody who knows about these issues, you don't want to put it here in black and white to say this is in and this is it. You don't want to do that, because I've come across people that think I'm out of Islam, and when you talk to them, it's not the case.
Yes.
So you don't want to make it black and white. Every situation could be different.
It's very different. And I think that's like why these conversations are really important, because I think we forget how nuanced Islam is. Sia, we've talked about this reframing of the idea of agitation is actually good, right? And having doubts can bring you closer to Allah. Do you feel like in the community people understand that? Do you think that reframing is happening on a wider scale, especially with reverts who are coming into the fold?
Yeah, I do. I do think our teachers, our scholars, are supportive of these challenging questions, these challenging discussions, and they don't take this tough, hardline approach with it. In the Revo community, it's really interesting because those doubts and that reframing is actually what took us out of one faith and brought us into another.
Yes, subhanAllah.
So then in Islam, having those doubts can actually be a little bit scary, because last time you had those, you left your life behind.
Yeah.
But the difference, I would say, within Islam is our community, our teachers, our scholars are encouraging us to ask the challenging questions, are encouraging us to, be agitated with what we're believing. Actually, subhanAllah, my class on Tuesday, my teacher, she was teaching a really difficult concept, one that could be tough for a lot of women to swallow. And she finished it with saying, okay, now argue with me until your faith is firm, until you are convinced with what I'm telling you. Like, argue with me, tell me, disagree with me. I want you to tell me what you have.
Yeah.
No one had to, because mashallah, she explained it in an amazing way, and she's a master at what she does. But she gave us that opportunity. And she gave us that opportunity to challenge her, to ask, to discuss, and to actually get that certainty. And I think that certainty and being actually convinced with what we're hearing is really important.
Yeah.
Like, we can believe something, but am I actually convinced with it? Like hijab. Okay, I believe in the principles of hijab.
Of modesty. And
yes, I believe in it. I believe that it protects women. I believe this. Okay, I believe it. But am I convinced that it's the right thing? So I do think our community and our teachers and our scholars are doing a good job at allowing these forums. We're having one right now, actually. So I do think we're doing a good job of it.
Thank you. And feel free, panelists, to discuss with each other. Don't wait for me to bring you into the conversation.
Then on that permission, I was just going to, it was so heartening to hear is here, and also Sheikh Wissam's point about, and your question about the Iman factor, the losing and the versus fluctuation of Iman. To me, this I kind of love analogies.
Yes.
So this sun analogy popped up. Like, for example, if I were to look at the sun today, and before looking at the sun, I'm just like, okay, the sun is there. We saw a full flung of the sun in black summer of Sydney like 2 years ago now. But we know the sun, I know the sun by knowledge exists. Then I go and check out the sun. Oh yeah, sun, I can see by my eyes, as glaring as it may be, maybe soft parts early in the mornings. I check out the sun. Okay, the sun is there. Then at noon, I'm just sitting under the sun and I'm receiving its warmth and heat. Now, tomorrow or day after tomorrow, I'm not going to wake up and say, no, the sun doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because now, by knowledge, I know it. These are talking about the levels of yaqeen or certainty. By knowledge, by seeing, by experience, I know that the sun actually exists. So as I think Sheikh Wissam alluded, I think our position, from what I know from the classic scholars, Imam Maturidi and Imam Abu Hanifa, says that once you gain faith, belief doesn't fluctuate. Our contact with it, our motivation with it, that kind of goes up and down, and that's the levels of different certainty levels, whether it's our new experiences with something new we've never experienced in time, and it's just brought some questions, and like Sia said, where's my heart's response to it? I can theoretically understand something, I can rationally understand something, but what about my heart? It's like, where's my motivation coming? That sort of simmering down of faith from the intellect to the heart, that's a journey that is a lifetime, and that's where that agitation or that struggle continues on. So I just wanted to say that.
And I think a place where motivation is often threatened is when you've gone through a recent trauma, right? And when you've gone through suffering in this world and in this dunya, and you start to have those intrusive thoughts that you've talked about, like, if Allah is so merciful and if Allah is so good, then why am I experiencing this? Is there any advice that you can talk about that kind of thought processes that I'm sure, Muslims across the spectrum have, young people, reverts, established Muslim? You spoke about the guy who, is a Hafiz who had the same thoughts. So what advice do you provide to someone who says, I've just gone through a recent trauma? It could be even trauma within the Muslim community, from a Muslim community. What advice do you give them? How do you get them to talk to that? Sheikh Wissam.
Depends on the trauma.
Yeah.
I do a lot of referrals.
Yeah.
And so people, if there's something that is within the religious sphere, then obviously we can start by addressing that. But if it's in the sphere whereby somebody needs assistance, let's say a psychologist or a counsellor, in that facet, then I do a lot of referrals.
Yeah.
And so trauma is real. And sometimes it can be cyclical, sometimes it can be onset, something can happen, but certainly to refer somebody on. And so it just really depends. But if somebody comes up, has doubts and faith, has suspicions about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and whatnot, generally we've got a good program where we put that person on a 10-week program. First and foremost, we teach them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We teach them, how to respond, deductive arguments, how to think, who they are. Emotions are good. Sometimes people, they think they're having this emotion, and the emotion is terrible to feel.
Yeah.
But what people don't realize, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the emotion. The scholars, they even say that pain, even the pain, through that pain, it's a stage of love. It's a stage of love with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they talk about Qissat Yusuf alayhi salam, and what he went through and endured. But that was a stage of love. He went through so much. And it's a long topic, but our emotions that we have, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to feel that they're conduits to Allah. And so through that emotion, if you can work through that emotion and you do what needs to be done, that man, that Hafid that came to me, he said to me, I can't drag myself to Salat. And I told him, look, I said, if you're physically sick, you go to a doctor, he gives you a tablet. You don't ask him what the chemical composition of that medicine is. He says, you do or die. You either take it or you're dead. And I said, look, spiritually, you still need to do what needs to be done for you, at the very least, to spiritually survive. Even if you don't like it.
Salat. Okay.
He said, I couldn't drag myself. I said, look, ultimately, that's the bitter pill. At the moment, you don't feel like it. The emotion for it is not there. But you still need to engage it, even though you don't like it. And when you engage it, that habit of engaging eventually leads to permanence.
Yeah.
So practice makes
perfect.
Doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent.
Yeah.
Practice makes permanent. As Ghazali. This is very Ghazali based.
Yes, it is.
Practice makes permanent. Repetitions in a habit makes permanent, becomes permanent forever. And so it's one of those things that you just keep coming to, and in the end, whether you don't initially have that inclination, but it's built. So there's a lot of ways of attack, but by revealing to them who they are, what they're going through, thoughts aren't always real.
Yeah. What's
happening at the time they go through that doubt, that the imagination of kufr is not kufr, the imagination of excellent Islam is not excellent Islam. Their intrusive thoughts, it's okay.
Yeah.
The intrusive thoughts are okay. You're not judged on them, no matter
Normalizing
how
them,
bad
yeah.
they are. You could have intrusive thoughts about Allah. You could have intrusive thoughts about the Prophet ﷺ, about any religious character, but that does not exit you out of Islam.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
That's so important.
Really important, because people think I'm gone. How did I get that thought? Where did it come from? I don't want it. But the agitation is good.
Yeah.
Agitation means you've got something valuable.
Yeah. Because can you speak to that idea of
Suffering?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mashallah, Sheikh Bassam touched on critical points there. But one thing also that came up with that question of suffering in my heart, Amar, as you posted, I think most religions outside Islam really have a very big, dilemma in perhaps addressing it satisfactorily to people. Suffering is a very real thing, like Sheikh Bassam said. But having said that, many religions, if you consult those religions, they don't really give you a solace with the answer. It's either embrace it, or either it doesn't exist, or perhaps don't even, it's not a real experience.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in Islam, we don't have an issue with that, because perspective of suffering, as Sheikh Wissam again said, it's real, but it's a very genuine part of human experience. So the condition of human, the insan's Adamic condition, is that it's bound to go through, I guess that ayah in Surah Balad comes to my mind, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد, that insan or human being have been created in toil and in struggle. And so it's part and parcel of life, but I guess what Islam has to offer is a particular perspective. Like we had 10-week course run on just in terms of how do you reconcile if God knows everything and God is capable of everything, why then suffering of human beings?
Yes.
How can this compassionate God allow us to suffer? Islam has an answer to that, and we know and within suffering there's different levels of suffering, and my heart goes out to individuals, because Islam does not, alhamdulillah, take us comparatively. Oh, your suffering is too little. Have you noticed this suffering? We don't have a comparison of suffering competition. It is very particular to the individual, to whom, under whose Allah's attention, that person is actually going through whatever ordeal it is that is big in their lives that they're suffering from. And so Islam actually have answers for that. especially if it's something that is beyond the individual themselves. I'm not talking about the suffering that is afflicted by other human beings upon us, but I'm talking with that calls
Yep.
for a different call of action. But suffering from Allah's way, like if it comes, it is actually a test of God. Perhaps there would be something. Again, I'm giving a blanket response, and each individual has got their own
Yeah.
ordeal. Very important to keep that in mind. From a blanket approach, sometimes the intended design for us is not to stay at a status quo. It is constant development, because unlike anything in creation, we are from the get-go, from a toddler to a baby, not only do we physiologically grow, but we intellectually, spiritually, and emotionally are meant to grow forever, like all the time. So that pathway of developmental pathway sometimes requires some tough tests.
Yeah.
And it's not intended to make you afflicted and torture, but inshallah, maybe there's certain things within your heart, within your soul, that has got such capacities that needs to come out to the foreground. And
So
sometimes
again, we're reframing suffering and trauma to be an opportunity.
an opportunity for growth, inshallah,
Yeah,
depending on
inshallah.
what kind of
Of
suffering
course.
it is. But the counseling part of the human
It's very
suffering
important.
afflicted, I think, is critical.
Yeah.
And it can't be shy away. We can't shy away
Yeah.
from that.
See, I saw you nodding along to the idea of not comparing people's suffering.
Yeah.
Is that something that's really important to your philosophy of Islam?
Yeah, I think the human experience is very relative. I think
Yeah.
what one person, it's easy for them to withstand, is considered like trauma for another. Even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, you know, He only gives a soul what they can handle. Whilst maybe the actual level of testing we get is the same, the means are different. And I think that's really important to say, and I also want to really highlight what Mickey said, that we don't say in Islam, well, you went through this, but someone else is going through this. It's a really unhealthy way to approach human suffering.
Yeah, it's an unhealthy dichotomy that we're.
It's super unhealthy,
Yeah.
and it's also unhelpful.
Yeah.
It doesn't help the person suffering. It doesn't fix that larger example you're giving. It just makes someone feel really
Guilty, which
Guilty,
is like
and-
the ultimate useless emotion, right?
And even
Guilt.
undermining.
Yeah. It's really an unhealthy kind of comment and experience. But the only kind of thing I just wanted to add on, because I think Sheikh and Mickey's really kind of nailed that whole advice. I just wanted to add as well, know your Prophet and know that no one suffered more than what he did. So sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I think it's really important to know what he went through. Like reading the seerah will soften your heart, and it will really give you perspective as well. Sometimes when I'm on a plane, I look down at like the little specks of trees or people or boats. I think, wow, my problems seem like this little now.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes reading the seerah can do that as well. You know, when you see how he lost children, he lost his wife, how he lost his community, his family members died without converting to Islam. It really can sometimes put your problems into perspective. But
I found a book once that was about the test that the Prophet ﷺ experienced and the legacy that he left with that. And I realized that he lost every possible relation he could lose, and he's made an example out of how we lose children, parents, uncles, aunties, everything. So we do really have a sunnah for almost every trauma that we've gone through. Yeah. We've talked a lot about how it takes a multifaceted response to deal with when someone comes to you with a concern. It takes a multifaceted response. It takes reframing, it takes counselling, referral. One of the questions that we get a lot is, how do you cope with the feeling of being judged by the community or being forced to fit into the status quo, and how that can also bring up these doubts and instances of losing your Iman? Sia?
so that question automatically takes me back to when I first converted to Islam. And I had this idea that I had to Arabize. I don't know if that's a word, but
Yeah.
it is now.
We've made it now.
Yeah, it's a word now. So I felt like if people said to me, or people automatically assume I'm Lebanese. People said, "Are you Lebanese?" I would be like, "Yeah." Like, I didn't want to show that I wasn't Arab. I was really kind of shy to say, "No, I'm actually Greek," and make that distinction. I felt like I had to really involve myself in the Arab community. Got to a stage where it affected my Iman so much. It affected, why aren't I accepted for who I am? I went to one of, who was probably my greatest mentor throughout my time as a Muslim. I went to her and I said, "I don't want to be Arab anymore. I want to be Greek. Like, I just want to be myself." And she was like, "Well, no one actually asked you to be Arab. No one asked you to fit this mold." And the more I kind of learnt about Islam, the more I sought a variety of scholarly opinions, went to different places, I saw that Islam was not a one box fits all kind of situation. Islam is for everybody in every place and every time. And so I think getting into different parts of the community and seeing different people and how different people live, I think that's really beneficial in dealing with external influences and not being put into a box.
Yeah, Sheikh Wissam, some of a more specific struggle is how to deal with how rigid sometimes our community is in their perspectives. What reflections can you offer on that?
Look, it's interesting. I mean, some of the things that you were saying are, phenomenal. And the question, Islam looks at, like, take culture, for example. Different communities have different culture. Islam never came to assert itself with this cultural, if you like, predatory worldview that everything is black and white, and it had to assert itself from an Arab perspective. This was definitely not the case. When the sons of the Ethiopians, and that's what the Africans, they came from Africa, and they were dancing in front of the Prophet ﷺ. It's authentic narration. And they had a special dance, and they were using the spears. And Umar ibn Khattab went to intervene. This is after they embraced Islam. And Umar ibn Khattab went to stop them. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he actually stopped him. And he said, leave them alone. Let them finish their dance. And he told them to dance well, like execute it
Put
well.
on their best show.
Absolutely. And even Aisha radiallahu anha watched.
Yeah.
And she leant against the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet said, so the Jews and the Christians know that there is latitude in our faith. You know, talk about pluralism. I mean, this is a shining example. And I recently spoke about this with the Macassans.
Yes.
The Macassans who came here before 1770. You know, with the Macassans, they stood in the water and they didn't put foot onto land until they were given permission by the indigenous people to step onto the land. We're just filming a documentary. I'll give that a plug in. But the thing about it is, when the indigenous people painted the boats of the Macassans, they paint inside the boat.
Yeah.
Right? They paint inside the boat, so which means they actually went on board. They had this beautiful relationship. Their culture was not eradicated by the Macassans. They had this beautiful relationship. Then when they talk about colonization, that's a completely different aspect.
It is.
Anyway, I know this is not the topic,
No,
but the point about it is Islam does not have this view that you have to eradicate your culture. This is what Islam came to do fundamentally: prune, nurture, accept what was good. Islam would only ever say if something was destructive, that it would say, look, this doesn't fit. But other than that, whatever was good, whatever could be nurtured, whatever could be accepted, was brought in. Islam is a very broad camp. And as long as there was nothing undermining the actual faith, that's absolutely fine. So
when dealing with the rigidity of community, I think is it just having this very confident understanding that actually true Islam is really broad.
Absolutely. Islam is very broad. It has to be the case. And this plays a really big part in identity. Identity is massive. I mean, you're hearing someone articulate something. The Prophet ﷺ, what did he say? There's no difference between an Arab and a non-Arab. These, we can't afford as a community, as a society, to just be passive anymore. We have to be active in campaigning this. So we hear about this, but we can't just be silent. We have to be active to root this out.
Yeah, there is
so no difference Arab and non-Arab.
We're talking about Arab superiority.
Absolutely,
and
no difference. The Prophet ﷺ, this is tribalism. We don't have tribalism in Islam. No difference between Arab, non-Arab. No difference between somebody who's dark skinned, somebody who's white, fair skinned, as the Prophet ﷺ said. And the Prophet was not merely someone who was verbal. He took concrete steps to eradicate this from his community. So as a sunnah, and bringing that sunnah into our life, then we need to take those same concrete steps, and not only when it's convenient. So absolutely, people shouldn't judge, and if they do, then I suppose this is telling of an ignorance, definitely an ignorance. Maybe even as your sister was saying before, maybe they've grown up with this cultural understanding which just doesn't fit actually with traditional Islam, and that needs time to be. That needs time to sort of dissipate. So.
Makis, if I could ask you something with your expertise with young people in mind, if I may say that. We've talked about, we've brought up colonization, we've brought up identity. I think a lot of us also struggle with reconciling our Islamic principles with the political spectrum and the very political world that we live in at the moment, and how sometimes we're trying to fit Islam into the world, or try and fit in the world like Western values in Islam. Can you speak to how young people are struggling with that, but also what you've seen and how they've done it well, or how you think it can be done well?
In terms of Western values?
Yeah,
or
like reconciling Islamic
political?
principles with the Western values
Western
and
values.
Western secular values, you know, and
Sure.
topics that are often taboo in Islam. Yeah.
Thanks for giving me that. But
Sorry.
No, without the expertise bit,
That's
my
fantastic.
observance and my observation, my interaction so far, you said a decade, like it's been, I can't believe that's how long it has been with youth, and times two with community at large.
Mashallah, yeah.
It has been not, like it's been genuinely an experiential observation for me. And when sometimes I think of, you mentioned the word dichotomy, I kind of really like that because in a bit of a staying away from that, and you pointed that earlier as well, because Islam does not have this dichotomized worldview between us and them. The Muslims, just like Sheikh Wissam said and Sia said, like, you know, the cultural definitions and discriminations, we're not tribalistic religion, and going and giving a bit of a perhaps Arabic, going on off that tangent, example of Yunus Emre. He's a Turkish poet. He goes, I love this. I love the creation because of the creator. So if we have this integrated worldview that who am I and who are you? You are part of me. We are on this journey of life, secular, Muslim, non-Muslim. This humanity is in this sailing boat of this journey of life that is happening in momentous ways. And so in terms of the particular values, it was interesting that there was a research done that which country actually is one of the most Sharia compliant country on the face of the earth. At the moment, I don't know how, it was a fairly recent one. If anyone remembers, please give me the reference or we can Google it later on. But they found out that New Zealand was the the first country that is most Sharia compliant. So when we talk about Islamic values, it is really universal values that we're talking about. And any society that adheres to those universality of Islam, Islam is timeless, Islam is universal. And so if it adheres to that, especially the passion that youth have, for example, one of the observations that I have with youth is this incredible honor that they give for the environment to begin with.
Yes.
Like Islam is a very green religion.
Very.
Like, you know, we are very frugal religion. We are very religion of, like, you know, this earth is, like you mentioned, the Aborigines are the first people, Sheikh Wissam, like incredible connection with the land that they have is very much in congruence with our values. So I don't see it as a dichotomized version, secular versus Islamic value, when it is perhaps problematic. So in general cases, it's quite healthy engagement. But I guess when it becomes problematic is when God is taken out of the equation. And also with, I think Sia alluded earlier on, this relative and subjective truths. Because we have certain truths that are objective, that is not even by Prophet, peace be upon him, it's actually a God-given objective truths. And then anyone can relate to that, that's fine. But if it becomes a philosophical sort of a construct of human beings, then that's when the problem becomes a bit problematic. And again, it's very blanket approach I gave. But I guess case by case, it depends on what values we're talking about. But generally, we have some certain grounded values, the oneness of humanity, the oneness of God, the one journey in this life, the one death, and then, how time is so precious and so relative.
I think personally that's a really beautiful answer to me because, you know, from a young age, I started with activism with Western values. You know, I learned about feminism, climate action, anti-capitalist behavior, colonization. And as I matured, I realized that actually Islam already had all this. I just didn't know it, right? So my Western activism brought me closer to Islam, subhanAllah. And I guess the question is now is how can we start off where people understand Islam with all of its activism that it does, without having to, you know, go through the struggle that I think is common, that I had, of learning it first with a Western perspective and then trying to fit it into Islam. So Sheikh Wissam, how can we facilitate spaces and how can we facilitate these processes in our communities where young people, reverts, older people understand the world through an Islamic perspective?
I think it's so interesting. There's so many ways that you could go with this answer, and this
Yeah.
question is such limited time. But
Yeah, I apologize.
no, I just, because I've seen it and I work with it with a lot of kids and a lot of youth all.
Yeah, you would be an
every day.
expert in young people as well, I think.
The thing about it is inactivity is activity. So if you're inactive, you're actually active, because it's impossible for you to do nothing and then your heart, the state of your heart stays the same. It's just not possible. The Prophet ﷺ talked about rust piling on the heart. So inactivity is actually activity.
So it's like being silent is like also
Yeah.
being
Complicit.
giving
Yeah,
permission.
absolutely.
So
It's like tacit approval,
Yeah.
right? And so Islam is not absolutely the case of saying, I do nothing wrong alone. That's the first step. I disassociate from disobedience and sin, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded. But that's the first step. The second step is, what am I actually doing? So if a person is disengaging, let's say, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded, or disengaged from associating those groups, MSAs or whatever the case may be, which are really active at university, or any group that sort of can lead them to the right way, that's problematic, because the world that we know it is like a rip, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, hold on to Allah's rope. And so, why did he say hold on to the rope? The analogy is a beautiful one, because this world is like a rip. If you don't hold on to that, and it's that rope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about is hold on to my deen, right? So if you don't have, and you're not active in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deen on this earth, you are going to fall by the wayside. There's no ifs or buts about it. And I've seen it, and I see it all the time, and it is so detrimental to people's lives and potentially hereafter.
So are you saying if you do have fluctuations in faith, what you should be doing is holding on to faith more
You've got to
and
hold on.
engaging more?
You've got to hold on. You
Okay.
absolutely have to hold on, because no matter where you are, no matter what, darkness you find yourself in, and people sometimes they lose hope, they think that they can't come back. Islam is not just for the elite. Islam is not just for the pious. Islam is for everybody, right? The one who committed sin, the one who's sinning, the one who feels that there's nothing for them. Islam is for everybody, but you have to hold on. You have to see it through. And so to engage this world without, if you like, that navigator, then it is potentially destructive, and we just have to be careful of that. And I've seen people lose faith as a result of not being active. So we have to engage this world.
Okay.
There's no question about it. We have to engage. People engage politics, people engage universities, people engage, their work and whatnot. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, look what he says. He characterizes the believer, and he says, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. The ones who believe, their love for Allah is dominant. In other words, you can love things in this world, but the love for Allah must be dominant. And when it's not, then you start seeing the problems. And so how do you achieve this dominance of the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do you achieve that?
Please tell us.
Well, this is what we're saying. Look, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you out of His love, al-wadud, the affectionate. He doesn't create for need, and He doesn't create in vain. Let me say that again. He doesn't create for need, doesn't need you. He's al-ghani, and He doesn't create in vain. He doesn't create like it's a sport.
Because He needs people to worship Him.
He doesn't do it. So why does He create you then? Because that's His nature. He is al-wadud, the affectionate. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you from His affection, right? Al-wadud. What does He seek back? He seeks that He gave you desires. What's the reason for that? He gave you whims. What's the reason for that? He gave you all these emotions. What's the reason for that? The reason for that is so you then make a volitional, voluntary, optional choice to overcome those desires and love Him back.
Yeah.
And this is the greatest love story.
Yeah.
It is.
It does sound
It's
like
the greatest
it.
love story.
Maybe it's my
There's
shot.
no greater love story than that.
Yeah.
I overcome all those challenges that you gave me, and I made a volitional, optional decision to love you back
Yeah.
over all these things.
Yeah.
And that's why He hid Himself. That's why He made Himself unseen to us. If you do that, and so Jannah is not just merely a place where you go and fulfill all your wishes and desires, but Jannah is Jannah is continuity of that relationship with Allah.
Yeah.
That's what Jannah is.
Yeah. I think
So-
that's really beautiful. See, I heard you nodding along. I saw you nodding along to the idea of hope. And I think when you talk about a love story, hope is always very important in a love story. What can you say about hope and Islam and how they really are encouraged by each other?
I think Islam is characterized by hope. I think we have this constant hope in God's mercy, in the outcome of situations in this worldly life, in our relationships with people. And I think that's what characterizes us as Muslims, this constant state of hope. I think if you look at other religions, they don't have this trademark concept. Whilst, you know, maybe if we just look at Christianity, they definitely have love. They have a lot of the aspects Islam has. Judaism has justice. But in terms of Christianity, they don't have that hope. They're already guaranteed. So we have this consistent hope. And I think having hope in something, it's the trademark feature of Islam. I think having hope, as Reva's, that our families will eventually come around. Having hope for, you know, the situations of Muslims all over the world. That's why we make dua, really. It's kind of a manifestation of dua. So I think hope, it's a trademark feature of Islam, and I think it's so essential to the human being. And I think without hope, I'm trying to find the right word, the quality of the human being is destroyed. If we don't have hope,
Absolutely.
what do we have? We need hope to be able to function, actually. I think we're in a constant state of despair, and we can get into all sorts of psychological issues. So I do think, hope is important.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful.
Can I just add
Sure.
to that question?
Please.
Contribution. This is the another word, and how that's beautiful thing you were saying about Islam is characterized by very
Profound.
very profound. Islam is contribution. That connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is contribution. And so whatever you engage in, any relationship that you have, if you make no contribution to, you feel a deadness. You feel something happened to my heart because you made no contribution.
Can you say including your relationship with yourself?
Absolutely. You need, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to take care of yourself, but don't forget you're also a caretaker. So you care for yourself, but you care for others too. But you need to make a contribution to that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And let me tell you, when you make no contribution to that relationship,
It does.
and we have to be realistic.
It's
What
reciprocal.
today's topic is losing my faith. This is not about one of those things. Let's hold hands and sing. Let me tell you, people lose faith because they potentially let go. They engage the world to such an extent whereby they no longer contribute to that relationship, and before you know it, they find themselves doing things that is basically outside of the tradition. And people do leave Islam in these avenues. So how do we save ourselves? Having good mentors, having good teachers around us, contributions that we make in our private time, connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we're alone. We're at uni, engage in those groups that we see that can lead us to the right way. We have to contribute, because no contribution, you'll find that the heart will die.
Yeah. Make us your reflections on hope and contribution.
Two things came to my mind as Sia was talking so beautifully, and Sheikh Wissam with contribution. I think there was a story, I think it's in a hadith somewhere, we'll Google it again, and inshallah it's authentic. Apparently Shaitan, Iblis, had said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, Ya Allah, like, give me a respite, as we know the story, until my last breath I will get all of them. I'll go after each one of them. The scholar, like you said, Sheikh, it's not a elitist religion. I'll go after all of them. And apparently Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this particular tradition responds saying that as long as they keep knocking on my door with forgiveness, I will be forgiving them. What kind of rub, like, it gives me goosebumps.
Yeah.
What kind of rub do we really are across? What kind of a grace and clemency are we really across? As long as they keep asking for forgiveness, not, okay, once they ask forgiveness, number two, forgiveness, no. As long as they keep asking for forgiveness, I'll keep forgiving them. Like, the chase is on, the race is on, and the hope is completely there. And that the second thing that just came to my mind, again, triggered by Sia, thanks Sia, was that couplet from Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi. You mentioned so much about love, Sheikh Wissam, but he's like, come whoever you are, the wanderer, the worshipper, the breaker of promises, and the lover of leaving. Come, 100 times if you've broken your promise, come. Because ours is not the caravan of despair, as you said.
No.
Ours is the caravan of hope.
Yeah.
Come yet again. And I think this is where the motivation of our tradition, its universality, its relevance to every facet of my heart, my mind, my thoughts, and therefore my motivation to contribute comes in place. Not for anything else, because this love is melting me. How can I stay away from this magnetic force that is calling on me, and if I falter, he's not going to hold me against it, damnation. No, I'll pick myself up. Our bias, we don't know, like you mentioned in other traditions, there's elements of it, but in Islam, I don't know for certainty what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thinks of me or the divine thinks of me, but I've got a bias walking towards hope, that inshallah, holding on to that rope, inshallah, I'll pull through with His grace and mercy, not by His justice, with His grace and mercy, inshallah. Yeah,
Beautiful
that just came to my
reflections,
mind.
Vicky. Thank you. I think we're almost at the end of the panel, but I think I would like to give you all an opportunity, 30 seconds. One of the last questions is, how do you gain, if someone is losing hope or is one of in those low points, fluctuations, what advice do you have to them about gaining the motivation to get back on track? 30 seconds to a minute. Go, Sheikh Wissam.
My first 30 seconds.
Come on.
Look, what I'll just say is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Iblis said to Allah, give me respite, Allah said, you shall have it. One of the Mufassirin said, if Allah accepted his dua, then what about the believer?
Yeah.
This is Iblis. So this is profound. And Ibn Ata'illah, he makes this point, right? Ibn Ata'illah Secondary in his Hikam. He talks about actions should not be the main lever of your hope, because you don't enter Jannah through your actions. You enter Jannah through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah. Your actions are merely a vehicle. So often you get people and they say to me, you know, I missed Fajr or I missed Dhuhr and I feel really bad about it. I feel like my day is gone. I said, don't think like that. They say, why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in a hadith Qudsi, أنا عند ظني عبدي بي, I am as you assume me to be. So you say, Ya Allah, I missed my Fajr, I missed my prayer, whatever the case may be, by accident, but you told me to have hope, and that's what I'm going to cling to always, irrespective of my actions. Actions are merely a vehicle. The hope should never be lost, whether the actions are up or whether the actions are down. You always cling to that hope. And so, you know, if somebody is really in a bad spot at the moment, seek out somebody. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always send when you ask. If you find yourself in a predicament, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, dua, by the way, and I'll just make this the last point.
Please. It's okay.
Please, like, as in, please make it the last point, as in, please continue.
Please make it.
I'm not sure
Please
which
make
one.
the point.
It's double meaning. Anyway, but I lost my train of thought now.
Oh, no.
It's
It was a
gone.
dua. It was about
It was
dua.
a
Dua.
Yeah.
We make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala irrespective of the outcome. So dua in itself is a worship. We make the dua, the result that we leave to Him. But you know what's interesting? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never disappoints. You just need to have that hope. He never disappoints, inshallah.
SubhanAllah. Thank you, Sheikh. Sia?
On the back of what the Sheikh said, I would say reach out to someone, but someone that can help. Sometimes we go to people that are close to us, but unfortunately a lot of the time they can't help us. I would recommend going to teachers, scholars, community groups that have the tools, the knowledge and the resources to be able to assist you. The second thing I would say is, this is more personal advice, is know what softens your heart. I think the diversity in acts of ibadah are actually rahmah. Some people gravitate more towards dhikr, some towards sacred gatherings of knowledge, some towards prayer, some towards fasting. Like, know yourself and have that self-awareness of what actually softens your heart. What actually do you see a habit in connecting you back to God, and just perform that. I've also found that, you know, when you have that sincere intention, you take one step towards God. As He says, He takes 10 back towards you. So just have that intention and just do what you know will take you back to Him.
You've almost spoken about a spiritual self-care routine, right? Identifying what it is that softens your hearts and doing that as self-care. My kids?
I don't know if I can add anything after that. Just like going back to the sun analogy, if God is beyond anything and any comparison. But if you were to look at the sun is always there, constantly, permanently, like omnipresent, like multi-directional, every time, irrespective of whether you look at it or not. Even if you're in those dark moments, you know that if you duck out, the sun will be there. So inshallah, no human being hasn't gone through despair. So what my suggestion would be, from my own personal experience as well, that Islam is a religion of iqra, and read. as it suits you for a particular role. Increase and deepen your knowledge because your questions are not invalid. Some of them may be for intrusion, as Sheikh mentioned, from shaitan and so forth. And you need to have somebody to bounce that off, that knows that perhaps a little bit from that their vantage point. But deepen your knowledge because Islam is, like you mentioned again, Sheikh, an ocean, and then a sense of community. Whoever you connect with, like Sia said, who you naturally align with, go with that and keep that connection, irrespective of what, because we are sponges, we are human beings in this matrix of life. We affect and influence each other.
Absolutely.
So I think it's, don't forget the sun, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is constantly there. It's dark, but tomorrow will be light again, inshallah.
What a beautiful way to end the panel. Thank you so much for all of your contributions. Inshallah, we'll go on a 5-minute break. So the people online, there'll be a 5-minute break. There's tea and coffee for the people on site, and we'll be back for a Q&A. People online will be able to ask them questions. We also have some that are anonymous, and people in the room will also be able to ask some questions. So big round of applause, please. Thank you so much. Please make yourself Okay,
so
we'll
right
just
next
be
door,
starting now.
basically,
Yeah. So just starting the second part of the night, inshallah, this is the Q&A. We'll have questions from the people on site today. We'll also have some questions from online participants, so you can do that via the chat. I'm sure there's instructions there at the moment. We also have some questions that were contributed anonymously previously to the night. I think I might start with one of the questions that was contributed anonymously. It's a bit of a deep one, so it has a bit of a context. It starts with, I feel disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I feel no faith in my heart, no connection. I have been through such hardships in my life. Domestic violence, infidelity, infertility, betrayal, abuse from family and parents. I have only just come out of my shell and I'm all alone. My family have deserted me. The so-called religious sisters don't like my newfound confidence. I find myself asking myself, is this what Allah wants? Would a loving God do this to someone? Yes, this is a scary question, and I know what it borders on, but it is my reality. I'm losing my Iman after 35 years of strong faith, but I don't want to. How do I help myself? If there's anyone who wants to start first, I'm happy to open it up. I'll give you some time to reflect, yeah. Makiz?
That's a very tough one.
I think acknowledging that this is not something that is rare. I think acknowledging that these struggles and these traumas are actually quite widespread in our society, and that we need to have processes in place to address them. So Shah, do you have any processes set up?
Absolutely.
Okay.
This is very common.
Yeah, it is.
Extremely common, and a lot of people go through this. And so what I would say, first and foremost, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make your circumstances easy. That's
Ameen.
obviously very tough things that and very real things that you've explained. What I would say is, first and foremost, is the demonstrable truths, right? These are the demonstrable truths. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create you to create a wedge between you and Him. That's not the design. So, in other words, you were not made to be put at distance from Allah. Rather, you were made to bring you closer to Allah. So you've got to start not from a place of suspicion. You've got to start from a place of facts. Who is He? Right? Because always we say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's evil in this world. But if you start from a place of suspicion, you're always going to end up with a negative answer.
Yeah.
And that means you've ended up with an answer, but it's not true because you've started from the wrong premise. So who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allah is Al-Wadud. He's the loving, He's the affectionate, He's the merciful, the compassionate. If you start from there, you end up with a good outcome. So who is He? Why did He make me? Did He make me to hurt me? No. Did He make me so I could suffer? No. Did He make me so that I could endure all these challenges and really internalize it? No. Yes, even though people do that in their lives, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made you so you could enjoy that relationship with Him. Existence is special. It's difficult, it's hard. Life is very hard. There is so many challenges in life. It's not easy. And as we spoke about before, the Prophet ﷺ, he lost his father before he was born. He lost his mother at the age of 6. He lost his grandfather at the age of 8. He lost 2 wives in his lifetime. He lost all his kids in his lifetime except Fatima radiallahu anha, who died roughly 6 months after. So that's profound. And this is the greatest being who has ever been created. So he went through so much hardships. Yeah, Aisha radiallahu anha would say, I never saw anyone smile more than him. And that's not to take away from your experience. Absolutely not. And we're not trying to make comparisons either.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to demonstrate is that Allah loves this being more than anyone else. Yet look at the challenges that he went through. And so what that means is definitely, it demonstrates once again, it's not to create a wedge between us and Him. It's to bring us closer to Him.
So number one is reframing, but how about these feelings of loneliness and of like rejection and betrayal from the people around you?
And this obviously is not easy. And so people often misconstrue what another person is going through, and they don't know how to navigate or how to engage somebody who's going through all these mixed emotions. And I sometimes find myself coaching people who are trying to judge other people, and they don't realize that these people are going through a difficult time. This is how you provide support. And so I think we need a campaign whereby we can educate our community in understanding that people may be going through things. Don't be quick to judge.
Yeah.
We are people who look for excuses, not aspects of to come back and provide some type of criticisms that hurt people. That's not who we are. That's not who the Prophet was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we are people who think about others. We are people who consider others. And if people around you are judging you, then I definitely think my piece of advice is to surround yourself in good sisterhood, good brotherhood. Brotherhood and sisterhood is so important in Islam. It's so important. I can't emphasize that. It creates a really solid foundation. It creates a positive feeling. It uplifts an individual. And you create that bonds. People know what you're going through. Then sisterhood and brotherhood is something I really push and drive for because I know what it does. And that sort of also becomes like a mentor type of training as well.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. And so surround yourself by good people. Surround yourself in those beautiful environments. Very important. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that relationship that you have with Him. This is really key as well. And that's the key really to all of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And how all of the things and people around us can drive us to that point, inshallah.
So yeah, one of your final advices was about seeking help, like when you need it, right? But also knowing where to seek it. How do you know that you're in the right sisterhood? How do you find the right sisterhood or the brotherhood? And how do you know when someone is qualified enough to give you advice and assistance? How do you seek these people out?
That's a really good and tricky question. There are so many different groups out there. Come to Isra.
I like that. We're going to plug Isra, everyone.
All with good intentions, I'm sure, but a lot with not quite the right execution.
Yeah.
I would say listen to what your intuition is telling you. I think your intuition is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a guidance, it's an internal navigation system that will tell you it is wrong to be somewhere or it is right. I think trusted people as well, trusted people in our community. There are quite a few people in our community by the majority of opinion that are well respected, are trusted, are honest and are well learned. I think going to those people and they can at least direct you in the right kind of way. And if something doesn't feel right, trust that feeling. If you're in a group where people are advising you to do something that doesn't feel quite right, so many reverts come to us saying, "Oh, I was told that if I don't put a niqab, that I'm not a proper Muslim yet." So groups like that doesn't feel right for a lot of people will listen to that, and if it seek it out, ask people, question. But I just think go to trusted people in our community, and there are a lot of them. Alhamdulillah.
Makiz, what do you have to say about this idea of loneliness in this fight towards?
Only He is the alone one. We are meant to be, I guess, we are wired to be connected. I think an author said recently, like scientifically speaking, biologically speaking, emotionally, and in every sense, we are wired to connect.
Absolutely, we are social beings.
So we are social beings. While as social as we are, there is still that unique personal journey without compromising the social thing. So everything that Sheikh Wissam said and everything that Sia said, I totally agree with that. But just with that deep question you started with, I said it was a bit tough because I really felt in my heart what I was hearing as you were speaking, Amar. I was just taking some notes as Sheikh was also speaking. I could hear in this sister, and I'm assuming it's a sister, hear her seeking Allah. She's not losing faith. I could hear her. I could hear much pain. This is not an easy ordeal when your family is up against you. All those series of traumatic events that you've experienced. Allah is there. And the fact that in your heart, towards the end of the question, if I'm correctly remembering it, you mentioned that you've had a strong faith for a number of years.
35 years.
35 years of faith, and you don't want to lose Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This, my sister, is the biggest testimony in my heart and my mind and everything that I know, a very clear indication that Allah is wanting you to have that wanting of not losing Him. So you're not losing Him, excuse me.
It's okay, mashallah.
So we can come with our own sort of comforts and the sweetness and the love that we are basking on, right? But for all of us, I'm sure for all of us here, the panel, for everybody, life will have its tumults. Life will have its dips and its waves, so to speak. And so know that your heart, and if you think you're losing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no, maybe this is that case that we're referring to when it's an intrusive thought. It's a bit of a waswasa that you're not, because you're being so honest with us, and thank you for that.
Yeah.
Your question has really gripped my heart, and everything that the panelists and Sheikh Wissam and Sia said again, I would say that just like we go to the doctor for a little fall we had, or anything like that, we look after our body. You've been traumatized, and there is absolutely no stigma to go and seek out maybe some professional counseling, how to deal with trauma, and in this stage that you're currently in, and just immerse with yourself, exactly as you said, in a community that you feel aligned with, because you have faith, as strong, I think, as ever, but perhaps the hurt is really very strong for you, that I think I'm feeling it. And may Allah, my sister, make it easy to you, to anybody listening, and I hope you're listening, that inshallah, if any solace is there, please come and knock at our doors. Yes, plugging Isra, but genuinely come in, let's have a coffee, inshallah. There's much hope, my sister, and may Allah make your trial easier. That's all I can say.
I mean, thank you so much, Makis. I think we'll take a question from the audience. If you just want to put your hand up and maybe speak quite loudly. Any questions from the audience? Give it a couple more seconds, and if not, we'll do some online stuff. Yes, please, Robert.
Oh, yeah, you need the mic for the online, sorry.
Firstly, I just want to say, it's absolutely phenomenal that we've got such a big audience here. But I just want you to take a look around the room. And if you take a look around the room, you look at, in terms of representation, there's roughly about 25% men here and 75% women. Right? There's roughly about 8 guys here and about 35 odd women that are here. And that is fantastic. But the worry that I've got is that we're talking about such an important topic like losing our Iman. Where are our men in terms of representation, in terms of saying, okay, we have young children, we're meant to be raising the next generation of children, and it's the women that are taking the lead, and that's nothing to scoff at or anything like that. But the point I'm trying to make is that where is our men? Where are we actually representing? If we are meant to be raising the next generation of our children, are we just basically reducing ourselves to absentee fathers or biological contributors? That's a really scary thing. I attended a conference last week on the impacts of pornography on children in schools and that sort of thing, and similar sort of thing. We were 5 guys and about 30 odd women sitting on the other side of the table. So it's a scary thought.
Thank you for all that. And I think there was a question in there about how to encourage male attendance and male engagement in these spaces. Any reflections to the male on the panel?
Just everyone.
It's a good setup. Look, we find this, very similar. I work at a public school, and we find every time that there is, a parent interview or some, you need to speak to the parent, you never get the father, you only get the mother. So they're always the face that's there, and they're always the face that's engaged. Look, I can't sit here and tell you from a data perspective as to the why. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's a good thing, because at the end of the day, it's definitely good in itself, because what it means is that you have participation and good representation from the female aspect, which is really important. We are a community as well that don't have as many spaces, especially when you look at, and I hope in the coming generations we see definitely in the next couple of years we see an increase. But mosque spaces, for example, right, institutions catering for all these things that they do for men. Men certainly, you find there are much more facilities and services that are available out there that are very easy for men to access, and harder for women to access. So I also see it as a positive that you have good representation in the women here today. I think that's definitely a good thing.
I think we also want good representation of men at tables
Absolutely.
Where power and decisions are being made. Right?
Absolutely. And look, I definitely think that educating that community. I think definitely educating the community. I think that's an important point. And the more forums we have like this to discuss these issues, and the more scholars and members and teachers and ISRAs and whatnot advocating the questions that you've just put forward. I think they're obviously going to raise awareness. Really, really important question that you've asked. I can't give you the facts as to why, exactly why those reasons exist, but we hope in the future that through education, definitely through education, these things.
And hopefully there's a lot more online.
Yeah.
I was thinking
Yeah,
that
sure.
maybe
Yeah.
they've outdone
Yeah.
us online.
Yes,
Sure.
exactly, hopefully. Do you guys have any reflections on that topic before we go to an online question?
Just, it's a good question.
Jazakallah. Asma, do we have an online question?
First question, can you provide some insight on helping keep early teens in faith, navigating the changes, especially with social pressures in today's society?
Did you hear that? I didn't hear that first part.
Just the last bit,
Yeah,
especially.
I'll
Mind
repeat it
repeating
for
a bit
you.
louder?
So can you provide some insight on helping keep early teens in faith, navigating the changes, especially with social pressures in today's society?
Early teens. So now we get to talk to the teachers on the panel. Sia, do you have any?
My experience with teenagers is that they don't like words, they like actions.
Yeah.
They want to see you doing what you're telling them to do. They want to see you visible in their spaces. They want to see practical guidance. They don't want you to tell them, we pray as Muslims. They want to see you praying and then pray with you. I'm not a parent. I didn't grow up Muslim, so I can't give any practical advice. But from a teacher perspective, I would just say teenagers like action. They don't really buy words. Side note, kids like masters at reading people. They are absolute masters of it. Anyone who went to high school, a casual teacher that's just going to let you run riot to one who is not. So kids are masters at reading people. So I just think with kids, action is the best thing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I was just going to say, the fact that they can read so well, just off that tangent, I think there's a lot of emotional intelligence and that fitri, that natural emotional perceptiveness that kids have, or the early teens have, that make them perhaps very unique because they haven't really walked through all of these sort of hardships and all of these conditionings that life has to throw for them. But as I was thinking about it, I was trying to capture my point. A lot of the time when teenagers ask questions or they sort of quote unquote rebel, I'm talking from towards the parents or towards the teachers and whatnot. Sometimes, I'm not saying this is everyone, but sometimes as adults we may assume that perhaps they're challenging, or that perhaps they want validation, or it's a bit of an egotistic adolescent teeny thing. I guess by that we are actually basketing them. Whereas I think when they're actually going through those what appears to be challenging or rebellion, is a genuine sense of identity, not from an ego perspective, because they're forming themselves. They haven't walked 30 years or for 20 years to be able to look back, or how was as a 12-year or as an 11-year-old, as a 12-year-old. They're actually forming their thoughts and their selves. And so when they do ask questions, how to navigate, as the question said, I think, through the social pressures and so forth, they're not being rebellious, and their attention seeking is not for shallow purposes that sometimes we may think it is. It's actually a genuine sense of I don't know really what's going on. There's a pulling factor, looks flashy, looks nice. The TikTok is, why am I not allowed to have a TikTok, for example, if it's too young a person, or the social media platforms, they do look very attractive. And we know that there's psychologists using how to, your reconfiguration of the mind happens when you just use your dopamines with each likes you take and all of that. So it's quite a very attractive, adults get really drawn into and immersed into it. So imagine a teen. So I think allowing teens to be as they are, but also guiding them through the language of love. I know there's these famous 5 languages. It doesn't mean don't entertain their intellectual questions, because they're very valid, but also dealing them with gentleness and with love, because without judgment. Because they need to be validated, because they are forming themselves, and we need to anchor them, help them anchor themselves in their identities. And I think it's important. That just came to my mind.
Yeah, thank you. Sheikh, you were nodding along to the gentleness
Excellent.
approach.
Really beautiful points that you both gave, mashallah. And that's the point that I just would also like to sort of add on. There's this notion of giving part of yourself before you correct them. So let's say they did something wrong. Kids, that's part of life, right? They're going to mess
They're
up
allowed
on the
to
way.
make mistakes.
Absolutely. But before you correct somebody, before you say, look, what you did, or, you know, this could have been done better, you've got to connect with them. Kids, you know, and teens growing up, instead of looking at a child like this, or a teen growing up and saying, and looking at them as though they're an empty vessel to be filled with your wisdom, you should be asking yourself, what type of relationship do I have with them?
Yeah.
That's a key question, right?
Exactly.
Because I see teachers absolutely struggle with this, because they think that you can come into the class and just teach A, B, C, D, right? And you have no connection. You have zero relationship with that child. You've connected zero with that person. It's very difficult, and the teacher struggles. And so connect, you definitely need to give part of yourself to connect with them before you can come and give some form of advice. And so eventually kids will make the transition. They make, and I always tell parents, get ready for it. They say, what? I say, you got to get ready for the pivot from parents to peers.
Yes.
And that's natural. They're going to pivot. So around about 12, 13, mum and dad stop becoming hero, and now the friend becomes hero.
Yeah.
Right? When they were 5, they would have gone for a 6-hour drive with you. But when they're 13, they're no way on God's earth they're going for a 6-hour drive with you.
Is this
But
a
they go for that
Western
drive with
idea,
the
or does Islam also talk about this shift in
Absolutely.
in the role of a parent?
Well, it talks about this shift, because at a certain age, when they become mature, then you should take them as a friend. So that point, that shift, that break, it's actually when you take them as a friend. So you want to hope that you've done the good hard yards while they were young, and as growing up. And what advice I would have for parents is, I promise you, it is so important for every single parent sitting in this room. Do a parenting course. Do a parenting course. Go do a triple P parenting course, positive parenting program. Do it, because I tell you why, right? It is so important. You don't know what you're missing. You don't know what you don't know, right? It's the reality of it. They teach you about all these things. You know, parents sometimes offload all the emotions onto their kids.
Yes.
And kids just formulate the same thing. Anyway, hold the moral ground, be the exemplar. Right, hold the moral ground, be the exemplar, and kids will follow. Inshallah. I don't want to take too much.
Thank you. That's a really good response to the question. We'll go to another one asked anonymously. It says, how would you get back on track? I've stopped practicing, and although I still believe in God, I am struggling to find the faith to drive me. Sia? How do you get back on track?
I think the fact that you know you're not on track is a good thing.
Okay.
I think the fact that you know you're not where you should be is always really, really positive. I'm probably not going to say anything new now, but I would, again, reach out. I would identify what works for me. I also think these YouTube videos, these YouTube videos that soften the heart, like the 4 to 5 minute ones, I feel like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf for me always like his spot. I think they're always really helpful.
And that's where you can use social media.
Yeah, I think it is really positive. Being in a group that is beneficial as Riva, so we have a big Riva community where we have social outings together, like we have
I think
classes.
plug the ISRA group.
Yeah, it's okay, it's a new Muslim group. I'll plug it now. If there's any reverts out there who feel like they need support, we are alhamdulillah so well resourced, we're so well manned, we have a very supportive community. So keeping in those kind of groups that are helpful, with good friends. I think good friends as well are underrated, people that will keep you on track. But yeah, probably nothing new for that question from me.
Thank you. Mikiz?
Yeah, it was just, for me, it's like 2 points, exactly what Sia said. Knowledge and community. Like, I'm like, it personally makes a massive difference. Community on site, as you mentioned, like right now here, and also community online. Just being very, like, if you feel like you're wavering, just to your own self, like, you know, the whole muhasabah, the whole accounting that you do with yourself. Why am I just, if you scroll down, like, wasted 3 hours on, like, Instagram? Nothing is inherently wrong, including Instagram, but just know what are we really exposing ourselves and which kind of community, because over time we become to things we actually are exposed to. So it affects our thoughts, it affects our behavior, then it becomes a bit of a desensitization process. So I would say, like, you know, be very vigilant of the community you choose to have, because friendship makes a massive difference, and your community online and on site. So the sense of community and friendship, the right ones are very important, and the right information and right knowledge, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Sheikh?
Excellent points again. I mean, maybe I need to chime in there. They're fantastic. Look, how to get back on track, you need to disconnect from whatever is leading you off track. That's first and foremost. So distance between you and whatever is putting you off there. So if you're stuck in something,
What are some common things that take us off track that we're not really aware of?
well, see, I mean, let's say somebody's addicted to pornography,
Yeah.
right? So you need to disconnect first and foremost from what you're doing in order to put yourself back on track. Because if you keep going back to that same thing, it's wishful thinking. It's going to be very difficult for you to get yourself back in to where you need to be unless you put some mechanisms in place. Now, I'm often advising parents. There's good monitoring apps out there. There's good gadgets out there. Because these things do exist. Parents ask for that information, and kids should have these
Resources.
these resources. But beware, in my mind. So some type of strategies, but you need to be able to disconnect from what you're doing first and foremost.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example. After you disconnect, you make the tawbah. I mean, we go through that mechanisms, and then you start sort of moving towards whatever brings that obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But first and foremost, distance between you and the sin. Look, parents, beware. Definitely beware. Social media. I'm of the view, and I'm of the solid view, and I'm unwavering in my view, given what I've seen and given coming up in this generation, is that kids from very, very early on, they should not be given an iPad from the moment they're born. Right, they're given it like a dummy, like it's as though it's breast milk. They should not. That should not be the case, and they should not be introduced to social media early on.
So what's your age?
The age that I would start to look, social media. It's not a necessity per se that they have to have it. We're like living in this type of world at the moment where we think, well, that's the society, therefore we have to push them there, or we have to introduce it there as a matter of necessity. But why do they have to have it? Is it part of their identity? Or is it just the fact that everybody's using it and it's impossible because all my nephews and nieces have it, that they're the ones that are left out, and look, I'm left out because I have nothing? Is that the case, that I have to now submit to what the norms have become? Well, I don't have to submit to that. That's number one. Number two, there's no necessity for you to actually formulate social media as part of who you are as an identity. That doesn't have to be the case. Therefore, what would you use social media for? Well, what you could use social media for is for the advancement of good.
Yeah.
You'd use it for A, B, C, D, E, F, G, but not part of who you are from a personal facet, because that's just not, it doesn't have to be the case. It's not a binary, right? And so I think we're losing the argument if we start from the premise of they have to have it, or, this has to be introduced at some stage. Sure, we can make them aware about it, but we don't have to give it and put it in their hands from the moment they're 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. But look, making them aware, absolutely. At a certain age, at some point, the training wheels come off. And as they move forward in life, you start to tell them, look, this is that. You put certain restrictions around it. You don't have full access. Even you go to the standard iPhone, there's restrictions on the iPhone. Parents aren't aware of that. You can restrict the iPhone. You don't have to open up every single application on the iPhone. And so this is also problematic. Just parents, beware about what your kids are taking in social media. It's not a foregone conclusion and a necessity, like stuck in a binary, which they must have. No, be careful. What is essential to their identity? Social media might be a conduit to furthering your number one objective, which is what? Achieving Allah's rida, and that's his pleasure. So that's the number one objective. We can use whatever we can to move to that objective.
Inshallah. Thank you. We have any online on-site questions? Any questions from the audience? Couple more seconds. Yes.
Assalamualaikum. So my question is, how do young Muslim people, like my age or teenagers, try to not follow trends or the way your non-Muslim friends or even some Muslims, how do you not follow them and want to try and do what they're doing? How do you stay away from that?
Good question.
Very
Thank
good
you.
question.
Sia? Sorry, we'll start again.
I just am super impressed with that question to begin with. I think your advice applies to adults as well, not just kids. I would say find good friends. Find a good group of friends who have similar values, similar morals. Parents have similar values as mum and dad. I would really encourage you to be best friends with mum. I would encourage you to go to mum, actually because I know your mum, and I would encourage you to go to her with problems, questions, and to really seek her help. But I think finding good friends is really important. Trying to develop your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, focusing on, your prayer, your fasting, and doing that with your friends as well, kind of making it fun. In Ramadan, having iftar together, building that friendship for the sake of Allah. I think it's going to be really helpful for you. But I just really wanted to commend you. I think the fact that you're asking that question at this age, I'm excited to see what you achieve in the future.
Inshallah. Well done. Thank you, Sia Sheikh.
That's first thing I said was good friends. So
Inshallah.
complete agreement about having just good people around you. The values, what do you stand for? Just very important questions. And just be aware of this question. And the question is, what will you do in life? I am of the belief that this is not the most important question. What will you do in life? I think that's secondary. I think the most important question is, who will you become? Because you could do the best job and be the worst person.
Yeah.
But you could be the best person and do a job that people wouldn't even have respect for, but you're the best person. So that question, I think, let that also be something that informs you. Who will I become? That's primary. Not only what will I do. It's what you do, that doesn't define you. What defines you is who will you become.
I learned that very late in life. I had the distinction between that question. It's a very important one. Yeah.
Sure.
Ricky?
I was going to say, how old are you?
10.
MashaAllah. So not even a teenager. Commendable. I mean, I can't top that. I mean, that's, if anything, we can walk away as like, who do we want to become?
Yes.
That's very important. But one little thing that I could add into it, MashaAllah, very nice question, is know why the trends are not so cool to be in the first place. So to know them, we'd always say that trends come and go. Sometimes it becomes super cool, super popular. One song comes in, hits it, something goes viral, great. Tomorrow something else comes up. So there's no loyalty, there's no consistency with the trends. Like, okay, like today I'm in, tomorrow it'll be something totally different. Like, I don't know what the latest trend is, or what the latest TikToker is. So if you know that the trends are very like short-lived, like little, and they come and go, it's becoming less and less and more of trends. You don't want to be this person that's constantly going, and it's like you lose. It's like, who am I? Like, okay, no, I'm not that trend. I'm not this trend. I'm not defined by that. So also knowing that the trends, it's not every trend is not bad. Sometimes good trends go like, let's clean up the beach. Let's clean up Australia. I don't know if there's a trend like that, but if there was, I think it's good to get into it. But I think to know that trends, the nature of trends is not something cool and always there. Like fashion, it keeps changing. So don't go with just changing fashion. Create your own taste. And inshallah, the deeper the taste is, the more you will go with it, inshallah.
Very good advice. Thank you, Mikiz. An online question, Asma?
Okay, I'm going to be loud this time. For someone I know who's interested in reverting but is worried to commit bad sins and in turn halt their shahada out of the fear, how should I help them?
Oh, great question. Let's go to Sia.
I'm directly looking at
So I'm just going to answer this question in two parts.
Yeah.
The first is the fear of converting out of sins. I feel like from my experience, there's two types of people that convert to Islam. There's the people that study their way of sins and they take a long time in researching, and then they convert. And then there's the people that convert and like, hey, what's happening now? I'm a Muslim, so what do I do next? And I feel like this person is of the former. So they probably already have a good understanding of the requirements of Islam and the sins and the whole package of what Islam is. So their belief is actually probably there. The fact that they want to convert but they're not doing it out of fear, it means the belief is probably there. In terms of what can they do to help, they should probably take them to someone who's qualified to help. I think with reverts or people looking into Islam, we cannot give unsolicited advice. We cannot give our opinions. Please stop it. I'm not saying please, because it's super damaging. The wrong advice can take someone so far from Islam. Actually, the right advice given in the wrong way can take someone away from Islam. So take them to someone or guide them to a group who can deal with them how they need to be dealt with at their level. Whether it's a sheikh, whether it's a new Muslim support group, whether it's any kind of group that is trained and has the resources to help people with where they're at. That's probably my advice in how to help that person.
Thank you. Sheikh Wissam?
My advice is not to halt the shahada. Give it immediately. If the belief is there in the heart, give the shahada without hesitation. And the reason for that is because, from a very technical theological perspective, and only because you've mentioned it in context, there is no greater sin than disbelief. So because you mentioned sin, only because you mentioned sin, I would obviously say that, and you're afraid of sin, but that is the peak of sins. So don't hold your shahada because of that. If you enter Islam and you make sin, then we would follow the normal protocol, which is obviously to distance, feel bad, make the tawbah and come back. But you don't want, the objective is the hereafter. You don't want to have left this world without the shahada, and that would mean a ruination of the hereafter. So under any circumstances, don't hold the shahada. If the belief is there, then come into the faith and come into the fold right away. There might be other things that might be happening at that time as well, why someone might be thinking, and you might possibly not even be aware of. There are people who sometimes halt their shahada, sometimes based on what they see maybe Muslims doing. And so I've seen that happen before. Some people, they halt their shahada, the belief is not quite there, but then they see Muslims behave a particular way, and then they don't give the shahada based on the behavior, because they don't know what the faith is. I don't think that's the situation here. But if the faith is there, then that's my advice.
Thank you, Jazakallah. Makiz?
I would just add on to all of what was just said, but also like when I reflect back on how every single person who came to the fold of Islam during the time of the Prophet ﷺ was not a Muslim, and they were immersed with so many things themselves, like in many different levels of sin, like all sorts of things pre-Islamic Mecca, as we know the story. So the lesson from that for me is like gradualism. Islam is a religion of like gradualism, baby steps, one step at a time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows your intention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows like the struggles you're going through, and being realistic to human behavior, like it's impossible for you to drop everything that you know is wrong just tomorrow and just clean slate, because you're bound to relapse. Like if it's just a shock and it hasn't been really processed and internalized. So perhaps do take the shahada. That in itself could be a showering, inshallah, and a bit of an inhibition. And as you increase your knowledge about Islam, about yourself, and as you do those practices, make sure, like for example, the Ramadan fasting. Fasting is one way of incredible restraint of the willpower, or like refining your willpower. So I guess gradually take one step at a time, and being simple and realistic, and just make goals for yourself, which aspects you want. But it is a very tough one. I don't know which context of which kind of sense we're talking about, because sins could have so many layers to it. But my second advice would be dua. In Islam, we have this thing called active dua or passive dua. Things you do in action, so trying to stop yourself. Maybe if you're watching something like, I don't know, like social media for like 1 hour, make it down to half an hour. That's action, that's active dua. But also make it a passive dua. Pour your heart to God. Oh God, don't leave me. I've learned this dua that I've always loved. Don't leave me to myself, not even for a blinking of an eye. Because who am I to trust myself with myself if it's not for you? No matter who we are, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves me to me, I'm nobody, no matter how much I talk about God. But if I don't have Him by my side, I am just nobody, and I can easily sleep. So inshallah, pour your heart to Allah. Don't leave me to myself, not even for a blinking of an eye. And Ya Rab, O Allah, O God, O Divine, whichever name you want to pick on, protect me from my own self and from the evils of others and from all evils that there is, inshallah, with the full conviction of your heart, because He's all hearing, right? All seeing and all noting, and say, make this easy for me, inshallah, with ease. Make religion easy for me, and make myself ease myself into my own sort of higher self, as you've discovered, inshallah.
Ameen.
And may Allah give you tawfiq.
What a beautiful dua. Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of the night. I just want to give a closing summary of what meant the most to me throughout this discussion. I think we've talked a lot about honouring expertise and making sure we're seeking out the right people when we're in positions where our faith is fluctuating. We've also talked the idea about radical hope and how Islam calls us to be radical in our hope. We've talked about how Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was one of the humans on earth that suffered the most, but also was the one that was loved the most by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've been I think something that my kids really said that's going to stay with me for a while is no one is alone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the sun never fades and is never not in the sky. So just remember that as you're going through hard trials. I want to thank everyone sincerely for their contribution, their attention and their presence. Thank you for the people online, for the people on site, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Anna.
On the slide, there's been a course that has been advertised. It's called the Free Fundamental Questions Asked of God in the Quran, and it touches on this topic in more detail. Sheikh Wissam, you also need to plug your Before 1770. I've watched this documentary. There's a part 2 coming. Everyone should go and see it. Tell us more.
On behalf of the youth team at ISRA and myself, I just wanted to thank Ahmad Marquez, Aspasia and Sheikh Wassam for coming out and speaking to us today about this important topic, and just a little gift of appreciation for that. Another round of applause. Because why not? There you go.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's all right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all right. Good night, everyone.
So